Hi, this is Gaurav Biswas. Welcome to the NCERT podcast of the chapter Breathing Exchange of Gases, Class 11. So let's start. As you have read earlier, oxygen O2 it is utilized by the organism to indirectly break down of nutrient molecules like glucose and to derive energy for performing various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that O2 has to be continuously provided to the cells and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hands on your chest. As you can feel the chest moving up and down, you know that it is due to the breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organ and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following section of this chapter. 17.1, that is respiratory organ. Mechanism of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending mainly on their habitats and the level of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterates, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tubes, tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. A special vascularized structure called gills are used by the most of the aquatic arthropods and molluscs, whereas vascularized bag called lungs are used by the terrestrial forms of the for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrate species use gills, whereas reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frogs can respire through the most the moist skin also. The mammals have also developed respiratory system. Now respiratory system in humans. 17.1.1 Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostril opening out above the upper lips. It leads to the nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into the pharynx and a portion which is common passage for the food and air. The pharynx open into the larynx where the into the region that is called trachea. Larynx in the cartilaginous box which helps in the sound production and hence called the sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered within the elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis. To prevent the entry of food into the larynx, trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of 5 thoracic vertebrae into the right and left primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated division to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up with very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea primary and secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by the incomplete cartilaginous ring. Each terminal bronchioles gives rise to the number of very thin irregular walled and vascularized bag structure called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprise the lungs. In figure 17.1, we have two lungs which are covered by the double layered pleura. With pleural fluid between them, it reduces friction for the lungs, and the outer pleural membrane is the close contact with the thoracic. Figure 17.1, diagrammatic view of human respiratory system, sectional view of the left and the lung is also shown. You can see this figure here. Okay, page 270. Lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in the contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their duct form the respiratory and exchange part of the respiratory system. The conducting part and transport of the atmospheric air in the alveoli clears the foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air in the body. Temperature exchange part of the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs is situated in the thoracic chamber, which is automatically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side of the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of the lungs and the thoracic in is such that the changes in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lungs pulmonary cavity, such as an Arrangement is essential for breathing as well as cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves in the following steps. Number one, breathing or pulmonary ventilation by which atmosphere is drawn in the carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. Second, diffusion of gases, oxygen and CO2 across alveolar membrane. Third, transport of gases by the blood. Fourth, diffusion of oxygen and CO2 between blood and tissues. Fifth, the utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reaction and resultant release of the carbon dioxide, cellular respiration as dealt in the chapter 14. Now 17.2, the mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves in two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into the out of the lungs is carried out by the creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs intrapulmonary pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure, i.e., there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place in the intrapulmonary pressure in higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm, the specialized set of muscles, external and intercostal muscles, internal intercostal muscles between the ribs, helps in the generation of such gradient. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of the diaphragm, by which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscle lift of the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes the similar increase in the pulmonary volume. An increase in the pulmonary volume decreases in the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from the outside to move into the lungs, i.e., inspiration. Figure 17.2a. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles re- returns the diaphragm into the sternum to their normal position and reduces the thoracic volume, and then therefore the pulmonary volume that leads to the increase in the pulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of the air from the lungs, i.e., expiration. Figure 17.2. We have the ability to increase the strength of the inspiration and expiration with the help of the additional muscle in the abdomen of an average. A healthy human breathes approx 12 to 16 times minute per minute. The volume of the air involved in the breathing movement can be estimated by the using the spirometer, which helps in the clinical assessment of the pulmonary functions. In figure 17.2, mechanism of breathing showing the inspiration and expiration. This is expiration, and this figure is shows the inspiration. Now the 17.21, respiratory volumes and capacities. Tidal volume, that is TV, volume of an air inspired or expired during the normal respiration, it is approx 500 ml, i.e., a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 milliliter of an air per minute. Inspiratory reserve volume, IRV, additional volume of air a person can inspire of forcible inspiration. This average 2,500 to 3,000 milliliter. Expiratory reserve volume, ERV, additional volume of air a person can expire or forcible expiration. This average is 1000 to 1100 ml. Page number 272, residual volume, RV, volume of an air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. The average 1100 to 1200 ml. By adding up a few specific volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities, which can be used as a clinical diagnosis. Inspiratory capacity, I see, the total volume of an air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, TV, and plus IRB. Expiratory reserve expiratory capacity, EC, total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, TV, plus ERV. Functional residual volume capacity, that volume of air that will remain in the lungs after normal expiration. This includes ERV and RV. Vital capacity, volume of maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forceful expiration. This includes ERV, TV, and IRV. Or the maximum volume of air person can breathe after a forced Inspiration. Total lung capacity. Total lung often accommodated in the lungs at the end of the forced expiration. Inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TV, IRV, or vital capacity or plus residual volume. 17.3. Exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary site of the exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on the pressure contraction gradient. Solubility of the gases as well as the thickness of the membranes involved in the diffusion are also important factor that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by the individual of the mixture of gases is called partial pressure, are represented as partial pressure oxygen for oxygen and partial pressure PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of these two gases in the atmospheric air of the two sites are diffusion are given in the table 17.1 and in figure 17.3. The data given in the table clearly indicates the concentration gradient of the oxygen from alveoli to the blood and the blood to the tissue. 17.1 table. Partial pressure is mmHg or oxygen in carbon dioxide at different parts involved in the diffusion in comparison to those in the atmosphere. Respiratory gas, atmospheric air, alveoli, blood, deoxygenated blood, oxygenated and tissue. Respiratory system of O2, that is atmospheric air is 159, alveoli is 104, blood deoxygenated is 40 and blood oxygenated is 95, tissue in 40 and respiratory gases of carbon dioxide, atmospheric air 0. 0.3, alveoli 40, uh, blood deoxygenated 45, blood oxygenated 40, tissue 45. In figure 17.3, diagrammatic representation of the exchange of gases of the alveolus and the body tissue with the blood and transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. A gradient of the presence of the carbon dioxide in the opposite direction, i.e., from the tissue to the blood and blood to the alveoli, as the solubility of the carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than that of the CO2. That amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membranes per unit difference in the partial pressure is much higher compared to that of the oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of the three major layers. Figure 17.4, namely the thin squamous epithelium of the alveoli and endothelium of the alveolar capillaries and the basement substance in between. However, its total thickness is much less than the millimeter. Therefore, all the factors in a body that favorable for the diffusion of the CO2 alveoli tissue and that of CO2 the tissue to the alveoli. Figure 17.4 diagram is a section of alveolus with the pulmonary capillary. You can see this diagram. Okay. Page 274. 17.4 Transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. About 97% of the CO of the O2 is transported by RBC in the blood. The remaining 3% of the oxygen is carried in the dissolved state through the plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is transported by the RBC, whereas 70% of it is carried by the bicarbonate. About 7% of the carbon dioxide is carried in the dissolved state through plasma. Transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin is red colored iron containing pigment present in the RBCs. O2 can bind hemoglobin is reversible manner in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. Binding for oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily released in the partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration and temperature are the other factors which can interfere with the binding. Of sigmoid curve is obtained where percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the PO2. This curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve, figure 17.5, and is highly useful in studying the effect of factor like PCO2 plus H and comma H plus concentration comma etc. on binding of oxygen with hemoglobin in the alveoli where there is a high partial pressure of oxygen and low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, larger H plus concentration and lower temperature. The factors are all favorable for the formation of the oxyhemoglobin, whereas in the tissue, whereas low partial pressure oxygen, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, high H plus concentration and higher temperature exist the condition of favorable for dissociation of oxygen from the extra hemoglobin. This clearly indicates that oxygen gets bounded in the hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissue. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissue under normal physiological conditions. 17.4.2 Transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is carried out by the hemoglobin as a carboaminohemoglobin about 20 to 25%. This binding is released in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide PO2, the major factor that could be affect the binding. When partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high and partial pressure of oxygen is low as in the tissue, more binding in the carbon dioxide occurs, whereas when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and the partial pressure of oxygen is high in as in the alveolar dissociation. Page number 275 of now. Of CO2, the carbaminohemoglobin takes place in i.e. carbon dioxide, which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissue, is delivered mm, at the alveoli as RBC contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase and minute quantities of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the flowing reaction in both directions. As the time site, whereas partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high due to the catabolism, CO2 diffuses into the blood RBC and plasma and forms the HCO3 and H plus. At the alveolar site where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction leading to the formation of carbon dioxide and water. This CO2 trapped in the bicarbonate at the tissue level of transported to the alveoli released out to the CO2 figure 17.4. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4.4 ml of carbon dioxide in the alveoli. Now 17.5 Regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain the moderate to the respiratory rhythm and suit the demands of the body tissue. This is done by the neural system, a specialized center present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center and primarily responsible for the regulation. Another center present in the pons region where the brain is pneumotoxic center of can moderate the function of the respiratory rhythmic center. Neural signal from the center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosynthetic area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, while which is highly sensitive in carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. Increase in the this substance can activate the center, which turns into the signal of the rhythm center to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process, by which this substance can be eliminated. Receptor associated with the aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize changes of CO2 and H plus concentration to send necessary signals to the rhythm center and remedial. Since this role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. Now 17.6 Disorders of respiratory system. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema, a chronic disorder of which alveolar wall is damaged due to the respiratory surface is decreased, one of the major causes of the cigarette smoking. 276 The occupational respiratory disorder in certain industries, especially those involved in the grinding of stone breaking, so much dust is produced and defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to the inflammation leading to the fibrosis, proliferation of fibrous tissue, and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. Now summary. Cells utilize oxygen for metabolism and produce energy, along with the substances like carbon dioxide, and have harmful animals have involved in the different mechanism for the transport of oxygen to the cells, for the removal of carbon dioxide from the there, and we have a well developed respiratory system comprising the lungs and associated with the air passage to perform this function. First step of respiration is breathing, by which atmosphere is taken in the respiration and alveolar air is released out expiration. Exchange of oxygen and CO2 between deoxygenated blood and alveoli, transport of this gas throughout the body. The blood O2 and CO2 between the oxygenated blood and tissue is the utilization of oxygen by the cell. Cellular respiration are these. Other types steps are involved. Inspiration and expiration are carried out by the creating pressure gradient between atmosphere and the alveoli with the help of specialized muscles, intercostal and diaphragms. Volumes of air involved in these activities can be estimated with the help of a spirometer and are clinical significance. Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at the alveoli at the tissues occur by diffusion rate or the diffusion independent on the partial pressure of gradient of oxygen and PO2 and CO2. CO2 their solubility as well as the thickness of the diffusion surface. This factor in our body facilitate diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli to the deoxygenated blood as well as the oxygenated blood in the tissue. These factors are favorable for the diffusion of carbon dioxide in the opposite direction, I from tissue to the alveoli. Oxygen is transported mainly in oxyhemoglobin in the alveoli where PO2 is higher. Oxygen gets O2 gets bounded to the hemoglobin which is easily dissociated to the tissue and which partial pressure of oxygen is low and partial pressure of carbon dioxide and H plus concentration are high. Nearly 70% of the carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonate HCO3 with the help of enzyme carbonic anhydrase. 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is carried out by the hemoglobin. The carbaminohemoglobin in that is to where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is higher to get bound to the blood, whereas alveoli where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high. It gets removed from the blood. Respiratory rhythm is maintained by the respiratory center of medulla region where the pneumotoxic center of Pons region of the brain and the chemosensitive area of the medulla after respiratory mechanism. So thank you. Hope you like this. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. This was my first video for making the podcast session. So thank you.